Welcome to the Artistic Spirit Podcast. Today I'm here with Susan McCauley, writer, actor, traveler, first-degree black belt in taekwondo, lover of animals, great stories, and fantastic adventures with good friends. She is a screenwriter and award-winning author of books for children, teens, and adults. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here today.
Yes, I am too. I've got a cat slithering around behind me, so you might see him.
What's your cat's name?
This one's Onyx.
Onyx. Oh, I love that. So just starting off, getting right to it, many aspiring writers struggle with finding time for their craft. How do you balance your writing career with other responsibilities and interests like travel and family?
When I was first serious about doing professional writing, I got my master's in writing. So back at that time, I was single. And so I was totally immersed in studying and working on the craft. I still take occasional post-grad classes for kids, do some highlights classes and other classes. So it's a challenge because I have a 14-year-old son. I've got a house full of animals. My mom, who's on the older side, lives in an adjoining suite. And, it's like being a mom and a wife and a daughter, and then you've got all this responsibility. It gets hard. So I try to write at least 1,000 words a day, Monday through Friday. And if I'm finding I'm not hitting my goal, I will just schedule it on my calendar. I will take that chunk of time and it's like, well, that's what I'm doing. If I'm not having to grade, because I teach part-time, if I'm not grading papers, if I have to put something on there because it's work, this is work for me. So it's like that's getting its own time, and it has to get its own time. I book it.
That's awesome. I think that's so important. And I also love how you say about how you're like forgiving of yourself if you can't do it, and then you like have strategies to get back on track. Would you say you do anything else other than like booking it in your calendar?
I like it to be organic. Because if I feel like so inspired in the morning and I just want to sit down and write, I would love to have that happen, but I'm not a morning person. I'll give myself a couple days and I'll usually get it in. But I have a routine. I have kind of a daily routine. It fluctuates, but having that structure, even if it's not on the calendar, helps me. Like I go to the gym every day because that helps me keep my sanity. So it's like, okay, I'm going to write an hour, go to the gym an hour, and then I'll write for another 30 minutes to an hour afterwards. And so oftentimes if it's just part of my daily routine, I don't have to worry about it being on the calendar because that's what I do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And getting back into your background, you have an impressive educational background, including an M.F.A. in professional writing from USC and an M.A. in text and performance from RADA and King's College in London. How have these academic experiences shaped your approach to writing and storytelling?
So it's interesting. So UCLA and USC are like rival schools, and UCLA had a great screenwriting program and USC has a great film school. But I knew going into it that I wanted to I wanted to have a big picture, more well-rounded just as a writer. And honestly, I'm glad I did it. I love screenwriting, but at the time when I was living in LA, and it's still that a lot of the studios have the biggest budgets, obviously, and they're doing the movies that they decide they want writers to write. And I realized pretty quickly, I wanted to kind of write what I wanted to write and not necessarily what a studio wanted me to write. And so when I was in graduate school, I got to because I did the professional writing degree and it covered fiction, nonfiction, poetry, screenwriting, playwriting. My thesis was screenwriting, but I also got some fiction classes. And even though at the time my fiction wasn't up to par, it gave me a taste of it. And that honestly planted a seed for later in my life. When I was in London, I was just playing with short stories. Nothing was publishable, but I was writing them down, and it fed into screenwriting because I think it made my treatment writing, my writing synopses easier. And then when I did my master's in England, I had the idea for a play. And originally I wrote it just as a short story that I wasn't ever planning to publish. It wasn't there yet. But then it became the basis for a play that was my RADA dissertation. And now it's a screenplay. So to me, it all kind of fits together. And fiction, the publishing world is still very, very hard. but it doesn't cost as much money to get a book published as it does to make a big movie. So I knew, I saw all these great books for kids and teens, and I thought, this is so much fun. I had a few fiction classes, let me try it. And so, those seeds got planted, and then I started just playing with it and seeing, what I liked the most. And I still love screenwriting and playwriting, but fiction it gives me more freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you did. And kind of like more on that, I think it's just going deeper, like getting into your like acting experience too. So you've worked in both writing and acting. I'm just curious if your experience in theater and acting influenced your approach to writing characters and dialogue in your screenplays and novels.
Absolutely, yes. So when I was 8, my mom put me in a theater class because I was so shy, and she thought that would help. And then I just think it's hysterical. I was terrified to say any lines on stage. And so I volunteered to play Nana the dog in Peter Pan, because all I had to do was bark. So that's what I did. But the theater bug bit me. And I remember the first night ever going out on stage and hearing the audience applaud, and the energy was just amazing. And I was just like, wow, I want to do this some more. So after that, I stayed in theater. I kept doing it. And I was always nervous. In high school, I took theater. And I remember I'd have to take a baggie of Tums with me, literally. And I was at the end of the day, and I would be like popping Tums all day because my stomach was so upset. And I was so nervous, but I just wanted to do it. And so I just kept at it. And then I went to California, did acting first. And I quickly realized, because I think it's getting better now. So this is in the 90s. It was, the time of Baywatch and 90210, and they had this idea of, young females needed to all be this really petite, certain way. And I'm like 5'11". I'm not super skinny. I'm not overweight. I'm just kind of a, average build. And I didn't fit what they were looking for. And casting directors would tell me, oh, you'll be fine in your 40s. Well, try telling that to a 22-year-old. It's like, what am I supposed to do for the next 20 years? Keep taking classes. Okay. But so that was really disheartening. But it definitely, when I write characters, even the dialogue, but also getting into the head of the character as I'm writing, I use a lot of what I used in acting. And sometimes we'll do role plays on certain scenes, especially if it's like a fight scene or a violent scene. It's like, is that physically possible? So I'll try to like act it out and figure out how it works. So I think definitely it helped immensely.
Yeah, and you worked with the actors community, and I actually got to see a reading of your play. Was that for the adaptation of Ghost Hunters?
Yes, that was for the
I love that so much.
Thank you. I'm excited. We're trying to get so Eliza Butterworth is part of the actors community. She and I become amazing friends. I love her. And she's trying to help me get a workshop in London, in-person workshop in London in January. So we're hoping to do that, and then we can hopefully get it on its feet and on the stage, because I think, I've got a lot of jump scares in it, which would be great for kids, because I think it's so important to keep theater alive. We've got to get kids in the theaters, and hopefully it'll also inspire them to want to, read more books, but they'll be able to see it, experience, live it, and then they can go back and read the book. And if they're not strong readers, they can be like, oh, I remember seeing that, or this is what the character looked like. So hopefully it will ease the reading process too. But I really hope, I think it'll be so much fun as a play.
Yeah, it was so interesting. Like I remember it went like longer than scheduled, and I was like so enthralled by it. I was like so excited. I love stories so much, and that one was really interesting because you had a lot of kind of like, I was gonna like email you about this too, like context of like things with like sigils and stuff. And I was just wondering like did you have to do a lot of research into like occult stuff to like even prep for writing that?
I did a lot of research. A lot of the like the Seals of Solomon are all real, and like it comes from biblical texts. But still, there's been a few comments from people. She uses real seals of Solomon. That's used in witchcraft. Yeah. Well, yeah, modern day it's used in witchcraft, but it originated, in the Bible. And so it's like, you always deal with that kind of pushback. And I'm based in Texas, so I get that a lot sometimes. But yeah, I did research on that. But you know, you have to find the line of where do I draw the line between reality and fiction. And I like to dive deep enough into reality so that sometimes I've tried to blur the lines. Where does the reality end and the fiction begin? Because I think it's fun. Like one of my books, the second Ghost Hunters book, I used Lafitte's blacksmith pub. So the pirate Jean Lafitte in Louisiana, when he was there, he had this place he would go hang out. And it was a blacksmith shop. And now they've turned it into a pub. So in my book, I use it as one of the main haunted places. And in reality, they say at the bar that it's haunted. But I think it's fun if kids can read about it and then they go someplace and they're like, oh, that's the place from the book or whatever. Because it just makes it brings it to life, you know, it makes it more real and exciting.
Yeah, I love that too. Since you mentioned some of like the criticism or pushback, I've always been curious, and I've connected with a bunch of like horror authors and horror poets, but I've actually never asked, just because some people are like super religious and things like that. Like, how do you handle kind of those, I would say, like irrational kind of like claims, like kind of like just criticism that is just like based on like kind of like,
well, a lot of it, yeah. So it's interesting because in Houston we got a big mix of people, all the way from, you know, really hardcore conservative Southern Baptist, all the way to, you know, trans community and everywhere in between. And I'm very moderate because I want to try to be respectful of everyone's positions, whether they're one end of the spectrum or the other. I try to see both sides of arguments. I try to see both sides of the coin. And, you know, the people who are, I mean, it's weird. I'm a Christian, but I write horror and I write spooky, which is kind of funny. But when I hear from some, like I remember when my first book came out called The Devil's Tree, I had some friends I knew who were Southern Baptists, and they're like, we like you, but we can't touch that book because of the title. And I'm just like, it blew my mind. I was honestly really, really shocked. And for probably the first year, I was really upset about it. And then I have a friend, Father David, he's an Episcopal minister, and I talked to him about it. And he said, you know, if you can't walk through the darkness, you'll never see the light. And he said, what you're doing is fine. He said, you're not the one with the problem. They are. And I mean, and if you, and you know, and he said, if you look at the Bible, Jesus, I mean, he went and talked to prostitutes. He walked in the community. I mean, if you don't go explore dark things, you aren't going to find the light. And to me, it's, you know, I get asked a lot, why are you drawn to spooky, paranormal? I mean, my kids' stuff is more, it's spooky fun. And, you know, the long and the short of it is, I don't know. I am just drawn to spooky stuff. I jokingly say my parents, I mean, it's true, but they took me on the Haunted Mansion ride when I was 3 at Disney World. And I was on the floor of the cart, like terrified. And then we got off and I begged them to keep taking me. So something just like enthralled me about that there's this seen but unseen world. And where do we go? And what happens to the spirit? And are they there? And if they're there, why are they there? You know, are they there to help us? Or are we here to help them? And so I think it brings up a lot of interesting questions, and I like to play with it and explore it. And I hopefully, especially in my kids' stuff, you know, kids experience loss. And if they experience loss, hopefully it gives them some hope. Or adults. I mean, a loss is hard for everybody.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned a little bit about some of your writing is to kind of like help kids who are like dealing with loss kind of like see that there's more to like, whether it be like an afterlife or like their spirit lives on, or like we honor them with our life, like things like that. I thought that was so interesting as like a mission and a why, because I think so much of the time a lot of people can minimize like children and teenagers like emotions and their just like their state of being, because they're not adults yet. And I just think it's so important that you're like doing work that doesn't minimize that and that like really honors that.
Thank you. I mean, I think I agree. They have these big, scary feelings that they've never experienced before, and adults probably have. And I think to minimize it is just to not, I don't know. I just don't think we're fulfilling a responsibility as an adult if we're not trying to help them through it.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Specifically like mental health. Actually, it's so sad. I've heard recently about a young person taking their own life, and it like always breaks my heart. Um and sometimes it like really shocks me that even like people who are young can kind of like think about that. Just because I didn't become suicidal until I was like 19 or 20. So it just like breaks my heart that people could feel that sooner and like be dealing with it even longer than I had. But I do want to ask some more about like coping mechanisms.
Right.
So what would you say in terms of an artist who's struggling and they're creative, and they're also struggling with their mental health? What kind of like strategies and tips would you share with them? And like how can their creativity and their art be a form of a coping mechanism, and how can they utilize that to face what they're going through?
Okay. Well, coping mechanisms for me, I mean, a big one is exercise. And it can be physically, you can be creative, or you can be not. I mean, you can go get on a
Mm-hmm.
treadmill, or you can do martial arts, and that
Mm-hmm.
has creative components, or dance, or whatever. But I think it's important too, especially if you're having a hard time, is letting the creativity out in a way that makes you feel better, and you don't have to feel pressure that anybody even has to see it.
Mm-hmm.
So don't feel like it's got to be something that somebody's going to judge you on. I mean, I think I told you, I kind of burned myself out in writing. And so this past summer, I took a break from writing, and now I'm recharged and ready to go, but I still had all this creative energy. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I've always kind of liked baking. So I jumped into baking, and it was just a really fun creative outlet. And then it was kind of fun because, then you could give it to neighbors, you could give it to kids, and it makes people smile. And then that makes you
Mm-hmm.
feel better.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think in a way, without realizing it, it helped me,
Mm-hmm.
that exercise. I mean, I do take medicine. I've needed medicine for depression for years, and I struggled with it at first. I remember I was 21, I was in LA, and I felt suicidal, and everything in my life was going how I wanted it. I was in acting school with Jeff Goldblum, and my parents were supportive, and I had a decent place to live, and everything was fine. And I'm like, why do I feel like this? And that's when I realized, I looked at my family history. My dad had suffered from depression. My grandfather had suffered from depression. I'm like, okay, this is just chemical. It's like if I had a heart condition or something. And I realized, okay, I just need to get some medicine to help me feel better. And then I'll, sort it out. And it turns out I was on medicine for a while. I got off of it just to see how I did. And my brain just doesn't work right without medicine. I just feel
Mm-hmm.
really, really bad. So I've been on medicine for years, but I feel fine. So people ask me, are you depressed? No, I'm not depressed, but I am on medication for depression because it keeps my brain chemistry stable, which is important. And I did have a little dip recently, and I check in with my doctor regularly. And, as you age, our hormones change. And for the first 2 years of kind of feeling crappy in the afternoons, I was just going to the gym and I was working out so hard. I wasn't beating myself up, but I was like exhausted afterwards, and I would finally feel better. But some days I just didn't have the energy to push myself that hard. And I finally said, look, we got to try something because this is not getting better. And then we had to add a little bit of a safe medication onto the thing. And now I feel fine. And and I don't think, a lot of people I know worry that medication might impact their creativity negatively. And I actually started reading about it, and the studies actually show no, not at all. If anything, you get more rest, you have more energy and more focus to be creative. It doesn't stop your creativity. So I don't
Yeah,
want people to be afraid to get help if they need it.
yeah, for me, because I take medication, and I remember I was really afraid of being less creative and being less passionate and just not enjoying life as much if I like when I started medication, because I was like a lot of what like people said and like a lot of the things they told me, like why people would stop taking their medication. And it was really like the opposite. Like I was creative, but I wasn't creating a lot of things. Like I didn't have creative output while
Right.
I was like going through things and having episodes. But then when I started taking medication, that's when I started to be able to focus and like have more creative output and be consistent and really like learn to like trust myself and like feel safe in my creative life to create.
Absolutely. I mean, because for me, when I've been severely depressed, I mean, you're so miserable. I've been so miserable. I didn't have the energy to create. I didn't want to. I didn't want to do anything. Did I have the creative ideas and feelings? Sure. And you can jot stuff down, but I just didn't have the fortitude to create. And so for me, it's really important. And when I had my son, he's 14 now, I had really severe postpartum depression. It lasted 2 years. I did not write in those 2 years. I started trying to write again when he was about a year old, but it wasn't until he was 2 when I actually really started feeling better that I was able to write again. And so, yeah, I think it's not something to be afraid of. It's something that can take time trying to find the right medication. But now there's these fantastic, DNA tests that, they can do like, I think it's just a swab, and you can find out which receptors you have that are better for certain drugs than others. So you don't have to go through, every single medication on the list and feel all the side effects. If it's not going to work, you can just get the test and find out. And I mean, I've read Medicaid even covers it for people who don't have insurance. So, I mean, I think it's a powerful, amazing tool now that's available. And it's pretty new, I think, in the past year or so.
That's so interesting. I remember when I was first starting on medication, the psychologist had told me that it could take a year to stabilize and like find the right medication. And I remember thinking, because I was in college, I was like, I can't like give up a year of my life. And it seemed like so daunting. It seemed so hopeless. And like looking back, like I think like a year isn't that much time, but like at the time it seemed so monumental. And actually this second time, because I went off medication and I relapsed and then I went back on medication, I made the commitment to myself, because I know like that first year is the hardest, that I would like do everything I could to like kind of like commit to myself that I would like hold on for a year. And I made the commitment to write a poem a week for a year and publish it on like my platform Summation 52. Like the idea was like, how much like personal growth could I have in like 52 weeks, which was a year. And I remember like thinking like, again, like it's going to be a hard time, but like that helped me get through it. And like on my bad weeks, like I remember thinking like, no, like I have to like write a poem this week. And actually my second book was from the poems from that. And actually I still am writing a poem a week.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, whatever helps you keep going. And I think making a commitment to take care of yourself for a year, putting yourself before certain other things that you might not have done otherwise, is really important. And I think the more complicated our lives get, and the more responsibility we have, the harder that is to do. But sometimes, like if I've had a full weekend with my family, I mean, I know I should do certain things on Monday, and I'm going to be like, nope, I need a day to just take care of myself. And, sometimes I feel a little guilty about not doing, maybe I wrote 500 words instead of 1,000, but I'll even like, if I need a day, I just need a day. And then I'll end up being more productive because I took care of myself when I needed to, instead of waiting until I was like miserable.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Just like rest and restoration. Like it's just like, it could be so healing. So getting deeper into that, why do you think it's important to remove the stigma of taking medication for mental well-being?
Because I think sometimes, honestly, sometimes that's all that's going to help somebody get out of the hole that they're in. If their chemistry is so out of whack, I think getting those, whether it's serotonin or norepinephrine or whatever's going on in their brain, and that's why they need to get, with a good doctor to figure out what's going on and bring those levels back to normal, even if it started with a situational issue like a bad breakup or whatever, and they've just gone down and can't seem to get out of it. If that resets your brain back into normal brain chemistry, then maybe you will be able to get off of it and you'll be fine. And you're not going to have, I know several people, they've needed it temporarily, maybe 6 months, a year, year and a half, and then they're like, they're okay. They worked with their doctors, came off of it slowly, so there was no big dip, and then they were fine. Their brains were like, nope, we're good now, everything's fine. So I just think it's sad to me when people are afraid to try medication when it might be the very thing that changes their life. And I mean, I know I have a cousin and I have some friends who are like, oh, you can do everything with diet alone. I tried. It didn't work for me. Now, that's not saying it won't work for some people, because I think it would. Hi, I have a cat yowling at me. But I don't think it's something that I think everybody should keep it on their list as a possible thing to try if they need to. And if they've exhausted everything else, and God bless him, I have one friend he's tried several medications and he can't find the right one to work. So, you know, it's frustrating, it's daunting. And I'm encouraging him to try to get that DNA test. It's like, okay, try to find out, you know, if there's something they haven't tried that might really, really work. But I don't know. I think looking at it like any other medical condition, instead of, oh, something's wrong with me, or I just can't cope. It's like, well, if you have a heart problem, it has nothing to do with something being wrong with you or not being able to cope. You just have a heart problem. So if your brain chemistry is off because it's genetic or whatever, then it's off. So help yourself. It's okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think stigma is such a big part of conversations around mental health, and I think it does stop a lot of people from getting better. But I'm curious, how has mental health impacted your art and vice versa?
I mean, when I'm depressed, when I've been depressed, I'm not creating. When I'm feeling better and I'm creating regularly. I know my dad passed away a few years ago and I didn't have any major depression. Obviously, I was sad, which is normal. I didn't like, you know, go, I need more medicine. I knew, okay, I'm sad. My dad died. And, you know, I didn't write for like a month or two. And I gave myself permission to take that rest. As far as, I mean, that's for me. When I'm feeling better, I work and I create. When I don't feel well, I'm not. So I'm really careful to just watch it because I don't want to feel bad again, you know? So I check up with the doctor every 6 months and I do what I need to do to take care of myself. I know about the stigma. So actually, you know, in the Ghost Hunter series, the boy's in a bad accident and loses someone important to him. And so he ends up, you know, seeing a psychiatrist, and I kind of have him do some eye rolls, and, you know, because there is a bit of a stigma about it. And I mean, but the doctor gets phased out as he becomes better and more comfortable in his new life. But I included it in the book because I figured it's important. It's what would really happen.
Yeah, I think that's so important for art to kind of like speak to those things that I feel like sometimes when we bring things up in conversation, we don't speak to, like whether it's like taboo or it's just something that like people don't normally make conversation about. I think like art is like a very powerful way for people to talk about things that sometimes go unspoken.
Yeah. And there's this ironic little funny thing. So my mentor, in England was Robin Midgley, who's an amazing director who just really understood me. And he was so supportive, even though my work wasn't there yet, he could see where it was going, and he passed. So kind of in honor of him, I named the psychiatrist Dr. Midgley after him. And it turns out I ended up getting in touch with his son a few years ago. Turns out his son is a child psychiatrist in England.
Oh, wow.
And his name is Midgley. So I was just like, okay, it was meant to be. So
wow, that's so coincidental. I love that. Synchronistic.
Yes. Yeah.
So for writers looking to break into the industry, what advice do you have on honing their craft, seeking publication opportunities, and staying motivated during the challenging journey of becoming an author?
So for fiction, for like novels, read a lot in the genre that you want to write in, and just write a lot I know some writers are like, oh, you don't need to take classes. For me, I like taking classes. I'm not taking many right now, but I think pushing myself, stretching myself, good classes with people who've got, they've worked with New York Times bestsellers or award-winning authors, and, learning new strategies, new techniques, new way of looking at things. Even if you might have already had the material before, the information before, they can give you new, fresh ways of looking at things, or breaking down plot. Some great books I use are comes from screenwriting, The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. I used to use that, and I still use that for plotting screenplays, but I use it for plotting fiction. And it talks about character arc and archetypes and how the archetypes marry with the plot, which is really important to me. So read a lot of what you want to write, whether it's for kids or, adults or whatever, and then just start writing, get your ideas down. And find, once you feel like you're ready, find some classes. A lot of people love critique groups. I think it's tricky because if you have an entire group of brand new authors in a critique group, they might not be able to push each other enough. So I think it's probably better if you have a mix of, middle, intermediate, advanced, and newer. But it can be hard because sometimes critique groups, if they've been around for a while, they're closed to new members. I was a part of a few critique groups for several years. Just ultimately, because you usually do like one chapter a week, it just takes so long to get through a whole novel that I was getting impatient and frustrated. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm really ready. And I was getting really good feedback from critique partners, and going to, for children's books, SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, is a great association to be a part of. It's international. For horror writers, HWA, Horror Writers Association, it's also international. They offer classes. They're very supportive. They have lots of opportunities. And so I was going to conferences for those, getting good critiques from agents and editors. And that's when I was like, okay, I need to work faster. And so I went through a few different editors, and I found one that I really, really, really clicked with. And so anytime before I submit anything, she's my editor. So, and that's a faster way. Yes, I have to pay her to look at my work, but it saves me what would take potentially 6 months or a year for critique group to get through. I have an editor. She was with one of the big 5 publishers for over a decade. She knows what she's doing. She gets my stuff, and I get it back in a week, and I can just go forward. So to me, it was like, it's a big time saver, and we click, and she knows what I'm trying to accomplish, and it just really works. We've been working for years together now. But if if somebody works with an editor at first and they don't click, that's okay. It might take a couple to find the one you really, really jive with.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for anyone looking for an editor? Like what they should look for specifically, or any things they should stay away from?
I would definitely look at referrals, because there's obviously a lot of people out there claiming to be editors, and they may or may not. It depends too, if you want a developmental or content edit. If you wanting to really get a look at your story and your characters, that's a developmental or content editor. If you need a copy editor only, then they're going to be a totally different kind of editor. Some developmental editors do both, some don't. The copy editor looks at consistency with punctuation, grammar, a lot of things like that. Sometimes they'll catch little character things, and then on top of that, you want a proofreader after that. As far as what to look for, I'd say look at recommendations, see where they worked before. Have they worked for any big or medium-sized publishers? What's their experience coming into it? Maybe see if they'll do a sample edit. Send them a page or two and see what they say, and see if you feel like they get you. Are they, making comments that you're finding valuable? And if they are, great, it might be a great fit. And if they're not, well, then maybe you need to look for somebody else. And also asking for referrals from groups like I mentioned, like SCBWI or Horror Writers Association. And I think try to find an editor who's worked a lot in your genre. So like my editor does a lot of middle grade and young adult, and she's done some picture books too, but she might not always be the best person to do like really intense horror. And you might find a different editor who does tons and tons of, steamy romance and erotica, which is not me. That's not what I write at all. So you kind of want to find an editor who really knows your genre, because they can also help you place it, and they know kind of the market and what people are looking for.
Yeah. Can you mention a little bit about like the traditional publishing route?
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's the big five publishers. If I can remember, Scholastic, Random House. I don't know, Penguin's on the list. There's five big ones. And then there's some medium-sized publishers who are also doing great work, like Shadow Mountain Press and Sourcebook and Jollyfish Press. And some of those will take unsolicited. The big five, you have to have an agent unless you meet one of the editors at a conference and they ask you to send their work, or they say you can send your work. And sometimes they read it and sometimes they don't. So pretty much get an agent if you want to try to go for one of the big publishers, and even like Sourcebooks. And I think the other ones, I think Shadow Mountain is open to submissions, but some of them you have to have an agent regardless, or some might be both, but they'll look at, you'll like won't end up at the bottom of the pile if it's agent submitted for traditional. So, I mean, the key is trying to get a good agent first. And of course I went about it backwards because that's me.
How'd you do it?
I got frustrated from all the rejections from all the big agencies and the agents, and I was so close. I won't go into all the nitty gritty, but I mean, I got a call and it's like, I really wanted to sign you, but I'm happy to like cut my list because the agent took on this massive New York Times bestselling author who was going into children's writing. He had been adult before, and she literally cut half her list. And so she had wanted to take me, and then that happened. And I was just like, that and a few other things. And I was just like, and I talked to my editor, and she's like, I don't understand why nobody's taking you. Your work is good enough to be published. And so this was after a few years of just rejection. And I was like, okay. She goes, well, why don't you try one book indie and see how it goes? And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, I want to do it right. So I literally took 6 months and I got a binder and I researched indie publishing, all the ins and the outs. And I mean, I still made mistakes and definitely wasted some money along the way, but I formed my own LLC and I created my own company. And my mission was and is, when I do my own, is to create books that you can't tell the difference between a big publisher and a smaller publisher. It's just on a much smaller scale. And so when my indie press publishes my books, I still work with editors and copy editors and cover designers who've all worked with some of the big publishers, because I want to try to mimic the quality. It needs to be there. And I always tell my editor, I say, if it's not going to compete with a book that comes out from Random House or whoever, tell me, and I'm going to keep working on it. So we have that agreement. So that's how I started doing it. And then I got some good Kirkus and Publisher Weekly reviews, and I started having foreign publishers reach out to me asking for foreign rights deals. And so I got offered a contract for the Ghost Hunter series. And from there, I ended up reaching out to some agents, and I got an agent to negotiate the deal with me. Because I'm like, it was the biggest publishing house in this foreign country. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. I need help. So that's how I got my agent. And that you'll hear that though, even with some of the, if you get submit to Shadow Mountain Press or to Jollyfish or whoever, and you get a contract, you can then go to an agent that you like and go, hey, I got a contract. Of course you're going to be interested because they know they're going to get paid. But you still want to make sure it's the right agent for you. There's this one agent, he's awesome and we get along really well. And he loves horror, but he doesn't like fantasy. And I write both. And so it's like, so I couldn't go back to him because he wasn't, it wasn't the right fit. So I think, I've had friends get agents and then they've had to break up with their agents, and that's painful because then they have to find a new agent. And so I think trying to make sure it's the right fit. So go to conferences and start meeting agents and see who you click with, what kind of books they represent. Don't just grab the first one that comes your way.
Yeah, where would people find conferences? Like, what do you look up?
So for I know children's books and horror are the best. So SCBWI, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, I think it's scbwi.org. They have conferences in different states, different regions all year long. They have a major conference in the winter in New York City, and they have a major conference in the summer in Los Angeles every year. But then they also have regional conferences. And there's one in Houston, there's one in New Jersey. So they're all over. They have some in the UK and other countries. Horror Writers Association, they have one big conference a year. I think it's in the fall, and it moves around every year. It's in a different location. And they have Horror University. So they have classes, they have pitch sessions. All these conferences have pitch sessions. So you can pitch to editors, agents, and, you know, get a sense of who they are and what they're looking for. So I would look up, you know, I know there's a mystery writers. I know there's a Romance Writers Association of America. So whatever your genre is, I would look up that and look up association or conferences and start seeing what comes up and what people have to say about it.
Mm-hmm. What would your advice be to multidisciplinary artists? So whether it be writers who want to make films or writers who are actors, what's the best way to kind of like find a creative path that is unique to them in a way that they can flourish?
Oh, that's such a tricky question because I think it's so individual to different people. For me, like I've had the acting part of my life on ice for the past like 20 years because I was like, there's no way. With my writing career really starting to take off, I'm really trying to focus on getting things done. I have deadlines, but I miss acting. And my son's in high school, so he needs me less. So I'm starting to back on with the voice acting because I can do that from home with the microphone. And, you know, my son's been amazing. He turned his closet into a sound studio for me.
I love that.
He's very excited. He put the foam tiles everywhere. So for me, it's trying to figure out, you know, I don't know if I'm ready to get back on camera again in terms of acting because in the 90s, it was they were so brutal, like about what you look like and how you fit. That just did some damage. And it's like, I don't know if I want to go through that again. They're looking for more real people now. So I don't know that it will be as bad, but of course, you know, I'm also dealing with being a woman in our society who's aging. And how do I feel about that? Do I really want to have to watch myself back on camera and, you know, try to look past that and focus on the actual acting? So, you know, I'm weighing that part of it. But the voice stuff, obviously I don't have to worry about looking at myself, and I love the voice part, and I'm able to slot it in with my writing and being creative. But I think it's a time management challenge and a juggle because you've got, you know, what do I have in my personal life versus what do I want to accomplish creatively? And then if you're looking at the creative, well, what's demanding most of my time and how much time do I have for this and how much time do I want to sacrifice? So I think it's finding the balance between where you feel happiest. Because right now I have so many writing projects that I want to do. It's like, okay, all I can handle is the voice stuff. I can't even think about trying to like do on camera auditions on top of everything else. I wish I could, but there's just so much time in a day. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer.
No, I think that's great. Because I think part of it is like a unique path, but I think that gives people kind of like a compass, like kind of like what makes you happiest and like what are your responsibilities and how can you forge your own path from that. And I think for so many multiple disciplinary artists, it is something that is so unique and so individual that only they can really forge that path themselves. And for me, the only thing I would say is just like to have courage and like kind of like, I know people always say progress over perfection, but I think something that's more powerful for me personally is purpose over perfection. And just kind of like you say, sometimes like you wonder about like, you don't want to see yourself back on camera. Like sometimes I do things and I think to myself like, oh, I don't know if I really want to like look at myself. But I think to myself that if the message is if the message is important enough, then it doesn't matter like how I look, it doesn't matter how I sound, it doesn't matter how I come across. All that matters is that there's a purpose to it. And even in my writing, sometimes I'll write things and I'll be like, I don't know if that's like the best it can be. And then I'll be like, but there's a purpose to it. And like when I create content, I always put my content out, and I don't really have much time to work on it, so I just put it out as it is. And it's just so important to me that people are impacted by the purpose behind it and not the perfection, because perfection is just an ideal that I don't think any of us can really
Perfection is
chase.
elusive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think too, having some people in your life who are supportive about your creativity and who you can like share excitement with. Like my husband is like totally computer nerd. And so my son is too, and science. And it's like they support me 100%. But if I'm like really excited about something, or so-and-so is going to read my script and I'm so excited, they have no idea who it is. And they're just like, oh, that's great. And I'm like, so I have people in my life who do, like there's an actor friend. I weirdly, I met him at the gym, and he like knows who these people are. And so if I'm really excited, I will like tell him, and he will just, he's very expressive. So he just mimics how excited I feel. My husband was with me one day and I'm like, that's how excited I feel, honey. And he was laughing. So I think having some people who can share the passion with you is great. And having even just a couple people that you can reach out to and say, hey, this is happening, I'm really excited, or oh, I'm so bummed this just happened, in a private, safe space, but that you can share the enthusiasm, the passion, the disappointments, all of it. I think that's super important.
It is so important. And then just lastly, is there anything you're working on that you'd like to just take some time to spotlight?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I just wrote a short story I'm really excited about, but I can't talk about it.
Oh no. Don't get in trouble here.
No, I won't get in trouble. I'm excited about the play that you've heard.
Yeah.
I really, really hope that goes up. And that series is going to come out in Russian languages in numerous Russian speaking countries next year.
Oh, wow.
So I'm excited about that. And the play, I'm really excited about the play. I've got some other stuff going on, but it's like nothing's 100% yet. It's all like evolving. So yeah, Ghost Hunters play I'm really excited about. I'm almost done with book 2 in my Merlin's Apprentice series. So I'm ready to be done. I hate first drafts. I will just say it. I hate first drafts. I like going back and making it good in the revision process, like getting to play with the words. Oh, look, we have a visitor.
Hi.
Onyx. So yeah, so I really, I'm looking forward to being done with the first draft, letting it set for a week and going back and like making it good, and then getting it to the editor and really just polishing it and finessing it. So those are the two, like the play and the novel. And I'm starting a graphic novel, which I also can't say too much about, but I'm really excited about that. My agent's like, you have to get all 3 books done for my Merlin series. So I'm gonna have the 2nd book done, and I'll be working on the 3rd book and starting the graphic novel. So I'm not sure how I'm going to balance that yet. I haven't written a graphic novel before, but I'm going to make it work because I'm just too excited about the graphic novel to wait. Sorry, my son has entered the room too with the cat.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to see what you do next and to hear about these projects that are secretive right now.
Thank you. You saw the play reading, so I'm glad you saw that.
Yes, that was amazing. I love that series, the Ghost Hunter series.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, thank you so much. Bye.